Hello and welcome. Today we get to talk about time, money, and happiness. Do they intersect? Why does having all three seem so hard? Why are so many people time poor? And how does it affect their joy, productivity, and health? And most importantly, how can we escape the time traps that keep us from living our best lives? Professor Ashley Whillans and two distinguished panelists will discuss these issues and more and answer your questions in our signature event today. Ashley Whillans is an assistant professor in the Negotiation, Organizations, and Markets Unit at Harvard Business School. Last October, Harvard Business Publishing released her new book, Time Smart: How to Reclaim Your Time and Live a Happier Life. Ashley, the virtual floor is yours.
Thank you so much for the introduction, and thank you everyone for being here today. I am very excited and enthusiastic to talk about a topic that is near and dear to my heart: time, money, and happiness. Despite the fact that I study these three critical topics, when I started my career as an assistant professor right after graduate school several years ago, I found myself miserable. I was constantly sacrificing time for money and productivity, even though I knew better. If I was having such a difficult time focusing on what truly matters in life, even though I researched the importance of time and happiness, I knew others must have been struggling as well. So my personal experience and also my research documenting the wide-reaching nature of the problem of time poverty in society today led me to focus on studying how to help people, including myself, make smarter decisions around navigating these two central resources in our life: time and money. So without further introduction to myself, I would like my distinguished panelists, Felicia and Jeff, to introduce themselves, and then we will be starting with a more formal presentation. I'll present some of my data, some of the strategies from the book, and then hopefully we will have an interesting dialogue about the importance of time, money, and happiness, both in our personal lives and in our professional lives and professional success. So Felicia, did you want to kick us off and introduce yourself? Tell us a little bit about yourself and what gets you excited about the topic of time.
Sure. Thank you so much, Ashley. I'm so pleased to be here. I'm Felicia Joy. First, I have to say, I think I'm a natural born proponent of being time smart and being happy. My first name is Felicia. It derives from Spanish and it means happy. And my last name is Joy. So my name literally translates to happy joy. So with that, I think I couldn't help but to be a proponent of happiness as a result of being more cognizant and aware of how we're spending our time. From a professional perspective and in the workplace, I'm a behavioral scientist. I did my graduate training at Harvard, so it's always nice to come back and share what I'm working on. I work a lot on culture transformation with companies. And I remember growing up and just even during my career, often people talking about work or thinking about work as something to be dreaded or something to be avoided or something that they were waiting to take a vacation from. And when I have researched and talked to people and thought about the things that can make work a drudgery sometimes, often they go back to issues of feeling burnt out, go back to issues related to time and the way it's being budgeted versus money. So I think this has a real significant impact in business, even if people haven't always seen it that way until, of course, they read Ashley's book. So this is both from a personal and professional perspective, really important to me. I am the head of behavioral science at Edelman, and I work in business transformation at Edelman. Edelman is the world's largest communications company. So our core competency is communications. Our organizing principle is trust. We've been studying trust for over 20 years. And I find that as we're talking to clients now about the current state of the world, with flexibility being a key ask, a key expectation from employees now, that this idea of being time smart is more critical than ever for being able to attract and retain top talent. So we're working with our clients on infusing and integrating time smart philosophy into the way they work. We're also taking our own medicine and doing it as a company. So I'd be happy to talk a little bit more about that later. But again, this for me is definitely about personal happiness, but also organizational and business outcomes that do have a tangible and material effect on how companies fare and how their employees fare over time. Jeff, over to you.
Wonderful. Thanks, Felicia. So I'm chairman and founder of GH Smart, which is a leadership advisory firm. There's something very strange about our firm in that we are unusually time smart, and we have been from the beginning 25 years ago when I started. And that's why I contacted Professor Willens after I saw an HBR blurb on her new book. And I said, like, hey, we struck up a conversation about how to make workplaces more time smart. So I founded the firm literally because I didn't want to become time poor like so many other people, coming out of undergrad or grad schools where you have, the Peace Corps or working in a not-for-profit sector versus finance versus consulting versus corporate versus, government. The things that were important to me were making an impact, making money, and having control over my time. So I could have a life, I could do volunteering, I could do exercise, I could have a family. I didn't know then what I know today, which is that I'd have 9 children, 7 blended, two twins who are 9 months old now. But I knew back then I wanted to have control over my time so that I could, emphasize things outside of work. So today we have 12 offices around the US and Europe. I'm really proud of this, folks. We just won Vault's #1 best company to work for in the whole field of consulting. So like an overall employee satisfaction. And I think the reason is, and the reason that the folks wrote about it was because we're time smart. So, Bain was #2 for overall satisfaction. McKinsey was 7th on this list. So I don't know, like, how did we do this, in a traditional sort of environment where high performance typically means sacrificing happiness and time. I was, young and foolish, and my last name was Smart. And I thought, let's be smarter about how we, set up the work so that people can make an impact at work at the highest level so that they can make money and have more control over their calendars and over their time so that they can be happy also. So anyway, we're having a lot of fun. Later, I'll share some of the bizarre things that we do at our firm that's exactly the opposite of what you'll find at traditional consulting firms.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And I'm really looking forward to delving into hearing more about specifically how you're putting time first in both of your organizations. Before we pick up on that part of the conversation, I'm going to present some of my academic research, really outlining the issues related to time poverty, where time poverty comes from, and what we can do in our personal lives to overcome some of the time traps that make us time poor. So as I want to remind everyone, please feel free to put questions in the question box at any time. We will stop and answer them. We really want this to feel like a dialogue in addition to sharing some data and insights from the research that my collaborators and I have been conducting and that Jeff and Felicia have been putting into practice in their own organizations. So I want everyone to think about what comes to mind when they think about the word time. So just for everyone on the call today, I want you to think about the word time and what activities come to mind for you. I'm putting up some pictures here to give you some prompts of what you might be thinking about. So Allison is mentioning a trade-off between quality interactions and amount of time spent. Christine is mentioning precious and limited amounts of time available. And sometimes when I pose this question, I do get responses like Esther's. People are thinking about the positive uses of time, spending time with friends and family, with our favorite furry friend. Volunteering, as Jeff already mentioned, is something that he likes to do outside of the office. Maybe if during the COVID-19 pandemic, we're also thinking about visiting places that we're nostalgic for, either via walking in our community or looking through old photos. However, for many people, when I ask them this question, the word time is synonymous with stress. In fact, in my data of over of representative sample of Americans, and I've conducted this all over the world, 80% of working Americans report feeling time poor, which means they feel like they have too many things to do in a day and not enough time to do them. That is, the stressors and demands in their everyday life get in the way of other things they could or should be doing. It gets in the way of how people want to be living their lives. As a happiness researcher, these feelings of time poverty, of time scarcity, of not having enough time can have strong negative effects on our happiness. What do I mean by happiness? Well, I define it in two ways, both our overall satisfaction with our lives, as well as the amount of joy, stress, sadness we experience on an everyday basis. So we really want to be thinking about maximizing our overall life satisfaction, as well as our positive mood experiences on an everyday basis. And time poverty makes it difficult to have positive experiences on an everyday basis, in part because we feel overwhelmed, in part because we have less time to spend on positive activities that bring us so much joy, like exercising, volunteering, and spending time with our friends and family. Now, this is not just a US trend. This is a global trend. So in data I've analyzed from the Gallup World Poll, which is a globally representative panel, I've found that all over the world, stress has increased over the last several decades, not decreased. And this is despite the fact that gross domestic product, an index of a country's wealth, has increased during this time period. So as countries have gotten wealthier, it hasn't removed this burden of time stress. It hasn't made citizens feel happier. If anything, it has created additional stress. Just looking at the US since 2008, stress has risen from 44% to 55% of the average working American saying they experience a lot of stress on a typical day. And once again, importantly, work-related stress is one of the number one factors that creates these high levels of stress in society. Of course, economic volatility, of course, how financially secure you feel does predict this as well, but factors related to work matter a lot. So we do have one question here from an attendee that I'm going to look at now. So time has shrunk because of the advent of speed of doing things. So when things now are so easy and quick to do, we pack more things into a day and a week and a month, and it makes us feel like there is less and less time. So this is really interesting. And there is some great research exactly along this point, that if we stack our days too full, we try to do too many things in one day, we have too much variety in a day, it exactly makes us feel time poor. You need variety across weeks, so you don't want to have the same week every week. That makes life pretty boring and unpleasant. But the academic research suggests that you don't actually want to do too many things within one day. So there is some truth in this comment that you're suggesting from the academic literature. We're trying to do too many things, and this act of multitasking, of trying to get so much done, does create this feeling of being overwhelmed and not being able to have enough time to do all the things you want to do or have to do. Technology also plays a really critical role. So you're alluding to the fact that technology has provided us with more time, but technology also takes the enjoyment of our time away. And in just a couple of slides, I'm going to get to that in more detail. But thanks for that great thought. So in addition to time poverty and at an individual level undermining our happiness, as Felicia was noting, it can also undermine organizational productivity. And rewarding employees like Jeff does with time and flexibility matters a lot for job satisfaction. So in an analysis I conducted of Glassdoor survey data looking at how employees feel about their jobs, I found that non-cash rewards like parental leave, flex time, the provision of sick days, social experiences had a larger effect on job satisfaction, controlling for a whole host of factors, regardless of industry, than receiving $60,000 more in compensation. So these flexibility benefits matter a lot for employee satisfaction and ultimately for employee productivity. So organizations lose 32 days each year to reduce productivity due to mental health, people not coming to the office because they feel overwhelmed, because they're dealing with anxiety, because they're dealing with family stressors. And this costs $44 billion in the US each year. And this was 2018. We can imagine during COVID that these numbers are higher. So Breaking this down, an employer with 1,000 employees might have 200 employees with depression and 6,400 lost days of productivity each year. So given these statistics, it's no wonder that 75% of American workplaces say stress is their number one concern. They're worried about employees burning out and feeling stressed out. And yet we haven't seen these stress levels decrease during the COVID-19 pandemic. In fact, the COVID-19 pandemic is a perfect example of Parkinson's law. Work has expanded to fill the additional time that we have not been commuting to the office. So in globally representative objective data using Microsoft Analytics data, my colleagues found that in a sample of 3 million people, the average workday has increased by about 8% or about 50 minutes, which used to be the amount of time on average people spent commuting. And what's causing those long hours? Well, these data aren't causal, but we can start to go in that direction. We see that employees are sending more emails. In the virtual environment, every conversation involves digital communication. We have to send emails. We're also having more meetings. And these emails and meetings are more likely to be happening outside of work hours now than they did prior to the pandemic. So the workday has expanded because we now have less separation between work and home. These additional emails and meetings are also undermining our happiness. So we collected survey data of 44,000 respondents who are working from home in 44 states and 88 countries. And we found that during the COVID-19 pandemic, most employees are feeling less productive. So people say that I've lost productive work time and I've gained unproductive work time because of these digital distractions, because I'm expected to be on at all hours, because I'm being a parent and a professional simultaneously. And this is causing more distraction and as a result, less productivity. So we see that those who are the most distracted are also those these are the orange bars here, that during the COVID-19 pandemic, higher levels of distraction are associated with lower levels of self-reported productivity, very unsurprising. We also see that employees report completing more chores, necessities, childcare during the COVID-19 pandemic as compared to before. And unsurprisingly, again here, women and working moms are disproportionately affected. We see that these additional chore demands, additional childcare demands are coming at the cost of active leisure, like volunteering, like socializing, that are so critical for our happiness. If I was to extend these data into 2022 and try to predict the upcoming year, the strongest effect is really the amount of chores that working female employees will have to complete. In my data, I see that working women will have 12 more days of chores in 2022 as compared to working men, looking just at my full-time employed sample, and that women as a result will have 5 fewer days of active leisure, socializing, volunteering, things that are so important for our resilience and our happiness. Now, to go back to this comment about technology and how it both gives us time and also takes it away. Some really great research by Bridget Schultz and others suggests that one of the major causes of time poverty is our technology. So if you look at that first bar, we used to have 1 hour free, uninterrupted time where we could do whatever we wanted. If we had a free hour prior to being constantly connected to our technology, we had that hour off. We were completely absorbed in the activities that we were doing. However, now our technology fragments that leisure into small bite-sized units of free time that easily go missing. So not only does it pull us out of the present from our leisure activities, but it actually leaves us with less time available to really get something substantive done or enjoyable done. Some of my colleagues have run amazing studies looking at how technology can undermine the meaning of our lives. In one simple study that they ran, they randomly assigned parents at a science museum to one of 2 conditions. In the first condition, parents were told, have your alerts on your phone on. We want to make sure you hear everything that comes your way. The second condition, parents were told, turn off your alerts. We want to make sure that you don't hear any of those digital distractions. Then parents and kids walked through the same science exhibit and rated their mood and meaning at the end of that experience. In the study, parents who had their alerts on reported being more distracted, no surprise. But they also said that that experience was less meaningful and less satisfying than parents who had their alerts off, in part because they felt more distracted about all of the other things they could or should be doing with that amount of free time that they had with their kids. So just having our technology available to us during leisure can undermine our enjoyment and make us feel time poor. It reminds us of all the other things we could or should be doing. So the first step in cultivating a more time affluent life at the individual level is recognizing and overcoming some of these time traps. So I just talked about technology, mismanagement of technology as being a major time trap that can make us all feel time poor and overwhelmed. But there are a few others that I want to go through in just a bit of detail before we launch into a broader discussion. The first is this focus on money and productivity and this idea of busyness as a status symbol. So Jeff alluded to this. So many of our organizations use busyness as a proxy or use constant responsivity as a proxy for high quality work and commitment. So we have this ideal worker norm in our society that says the person who responds to the email the first is the best. Of course, we need to break this habit. Busyness should not be seen as a status symbol or as a proxy for quality, but it's become harder to determine performance as work has gotten more creative and abstract and less factory, more creative output that's worked on teams. So it's much harder to determine productivity. As we've seen that societal shift, we've seen organizations rely on around the clock availability as a proxy for how committed you are. And that is something we should come back to and really have a discussion about how to break that pattern in organizations because it's so critical. Also, from a psychological perspective, it's easier for us to track money. So we track money in the context of our lives. We're worried about it. We're worried about saving it. We think about how we spend it. We want to maximize the amount of hours we work. We also want to be productive. But time is a lot harder for our brains to track. So we think, but this is part of the reason we undervalue time and overvalue money. Also, we are inconsistent with the value of time across time. So the value of $1,000 now is pretty high, and it's also pretty high in 2 weeks and 6 months from now. But the value of an hour, that's really high right now. I'm so busy. We have a million things going on. But an extra hour 3 months from now, I probably don't need that extra hour. So we're not very good at valuing our time in the future. And we're also, as part of this, not very good at making trade-offs between time and money. A second psychological principle that can help us predict, or it helps predict whether or not we're going to feel time poor, is idleness aversion. So we, as human beings, are uncomfortable with stillness. In one study conducted by my colleague at Harvard, Dan Gilbert, he stuck college students in a room and gave them one of two choices. One choice, you could blast yourself with mild electric shocks. The other choice, you could be left alone in a room with only your thoughts. Students opted to be blasted with mild electric shocks as opposed to be left in a room with literally only their thoughts for half an hour, attesting to how uncomfortable we are with stillness and silence in our society. This has also been replicated with working adults who say that they would rather forego vacation day. If they get an unexpected half day off, they just work through it because they don't know what else they would do with that time available. This is where we can optimize our time a little bit and start planning positive activities into our day now, so that we're prepared when we have windfalls of time in the future. We also succumb to what scientists call the mere urgency effect. I love this because I fall prey to this all of the time. So this is when we feel overwhelmed, which is a lot of the time. We feel time stressed. We're more likely to prioritize urgent things that feel small, like checking our email, as opposed to focusing on the important stuff, actually getting our work done that's making us feel time poor in the first place. So this can explain, in the book, I talk about this in terms of my roommate, Shannon. She would always do all of the chores and do all of the cooking prior to studying for exams because it gives her a boost of confidence. When you are feeling overwhelmed, you check a few emails and that makes you feel good, like you're being productive, but it's getting in the way of working at the most important task on your to-do list. So this is a really important trap that we all need to be mindful of. It's related to procrastination. We focus more on simple tasks that feel easy to complete, especially when we're feeling overwhelmed. We've already talked about technology habits. And so technology can create time confetti, which also contributes to this feeling of time poverty. So I do want to stop there and see if anyone has any questions or if our panelists have any thoughts or reactions. And then I do have a second component where I talk about individual strategies for success, for mitigating some of the time poverty we so frequently experience in our everyday lives.
Thank you so much, Ashley. I'll just share that regarding the mere urgency effect, I think that happens a lot, especially at work. So something that we've started encouraging as we start to model time smart behaviors at Edelman is that people set up a time that they look at their email and otherwise turn off the notifications. So if you don't turn off the notification, every time you get an email, it pops up. Or if you're on a video call and you're getting a chat message from someone on Teams or whatever platform is being used, then you're getting that notification. So we're encouraging and trying to create a cultural norm at our organization where people feel comfortable turning off those notifications and having dedicated blocks of time during the day when they check in when they want to, when it makes most sense to not encroach on their productivity and result in this time confetti or result in time poverty.
That's great. And that's something that I see in my data and really also want to talk, underscore is the importance of norm setting within an organization, because so much of time poverty and what makes us time poor is not necessarily within our individual control. We have control over some of the activities we engage in on an everyday basis, but organizations, managers really need to be thinking about empowering employees to take ownership over their calendar and not feel constantly responsive. So we do have another question in the chat here about what advice you could share for managing up. So for example, when you have a difference of opinion with your manager about what's urgent versus important, how might you think about having those conversations? I'm not sure if either of Jeff or Felicia, if you have thoughts on this, I can also chime in.
Sure, I have some thoughts, and I bet Jeff does too, especially since they've been operating at his firm with a time smart strategy well before they knew exactly what it was in terms of how you couch it in your book. So I think it goes back to what you were just talking about, Ashley, creating these norms. So if there is a consistent tendency for someone in a junior position to try to enact time smart behaviors, and there's a difference in opinion by management, I think that is showing that there needs to be a bigger and broader conversation at the organization. And we're encouraging our clients to have these kind of conversations to make these things more of an organizational norm. Because even if someone is diligent and trying to be time smart, if they look to the left, and they look to the right, and of course, if they look up and people are doing something different, even if we're talking about the fact that employees should feel free to make those choices for themselves, our human nature is not to go by what people are saying, but by what people are doing. So that warrants a bigger conversation. And that's something that's happening at our company right now, and also something that we're working on with our clients around their employee value proposition. So their employee value proposition is the narrative that they have out in the world about what it's like to work at their company and the benefits of doing so. What could a person expect to have as their daily experience in exchange for their time, talent, and commitment to this company? So I would say having a conversation on a broader level and encouraging leadership to think about, going back to Ashley's data on the enormous difference this can make, think about the benefits to the company by creating this organizational norm versus having one employee having to have this conversation with their manager on a repeated basis.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think there are like tools that could be used to accomplish what Felicia is talking about and what Ashley's talking about around this question. If you're junior and the norms aren't there in the culture, and you don't have a lot of sort of organizational power, it's pretty difficult. So I actually don't know what to say to someone who's junior and like trying to take control of their time more. But as we get more senior, as we're managers, or if we're CEOs or entrepreneurs, and you really want to create a more time smart environment, here's just like a blast of some things that you would see at GH Smart that I think helps here. For example, just yesterday, an interesting CEO came to us, wanted to become a client. we don't have any capacity right now to serve this client. And I actually was putting a little bit of pressure on one of our junior consultants to sort of like, like maybe take this client. But we have a culture where you could say no. So having a culture where people are empowered to be able to make choices about how they spend their time. Have an organization which there's much more focus on results than on the busyness trap. So at my firm, for example, there's a very open box compensation system. It's extremely transparent. And so if someone's telling me, hey, look, I'm working on this, I'm not going to be able to get to this other thing, because people are incented for results and not just looking busy or not busy. It's not subjective, and it's not this weird push and pull around trying to like guilt people to do something when they don't really want to do it, or if it doesn't really make sense. One last thing here that anyone can use, I found helpful. Even in my own work, I'm the boss, but if people want me to do something and I'm not available to do it, let's say I have an outside commitment, I just say I'm not available. And I think there's a weird norm in global kind of high-end, fast-paced professional service, firms where you need to like justify if you're available or not available. I don't find the need to have to justify that. So maybe it's a client thing. Maybe I'm doing a really cool Harvard chat with Ashley and Felicia. Like people don't need to know why, but I'm very clear about I'm available here, I'm not available there, and just the simply stating your availability, I think, can get around this sort of feeling of loss of control when your boss, let's say, has a different idea of what you should be doing than what you want to be doing.
This is great. And I'm just going to comment based on research-based ideas that relate to a few things that each of you said. So Jeff, just picking up on this conversation about being a junior person and it being difficult to negotiate for time. So we have done some research studies on this topic of obviously, so there's kind of 4 strategies I talk about, which is cultivating a time first mindset, finding time, so doing a time audit, funding time, which is buying time. So someone asked about this in the chat window, and we can get to this question in a second, or reframing time. And so one of the strategies of finding time that's critically important is asking for more time if you need it, or negotiating for time and talking about that. As much as you would socialize the idea of negotiating for salary when you're starting a new job. But we do see that junior employees and women are especially less likely to ask for more time on adjustable deadlines at work. And what we've also found in our data is that everyone overestimates the cost of asking for more time. So we worry too much about what our managers might think of us. If anything, if we proactively ask for more time on an adjustable deadline at work, so not after the fact, presumably with enough time for your manager to plan the workflow accordingly, and as long as the deadline is not a firm one, we see that managers actually see that employee as more committed. They want to turn in better quality work, and they're more engaged at work. And this is counter to what we believe. So what I always kind of suggest is we should think about asking for more time, not be afraid of it, create norms to make everyone feel empowered, especially junior employees or women who might be less likely. And we've also run a field experiment showing that policies where you can write a little form and say why you need more time on something go a long way in reducing the ambiguity of whether it's okay or not to ask for more time. So this speaks to the importance of clear policies related to deadline extension requests or saying no, and helping all employees feel empowered to do so. And then we also do see that there is value in saying no, and just saying no, period. Not saying, no, I can't do that because I don't have time. So we actually have data on this point. How should you say no if you're going to say no? The best way to say no to preserve interpersonal trust is simply to say no without providing a reason. Or if you have a really good externally valid reason due to a personal constraint, you can say that. And the worst way is saying, no, I don't have enough time to do that. Because we all have 24 hours in a day. And so by me saying I don't have time, Jeff, I can't help you with that, you think, well, obviously you just don't value whatever it is that I was asking. You don't value me as a person. So we want to avoid saying no and providing too many explanations. As my research suggests, a simple no is often the best strategy for preserving interpersonal trust. We have an attendee here who asks, would you recommend monetizing the value of one's time? So if I value my time at $100 an hour, then I might think about delegating some home tasks that might be cheaper. I have tested this exact question. I also had a similar question when I was pursuing this research. And as it turns out, quantifying our time is not very good for time stress or happiness. So when we think about the economic value of our time, we actually become more focused on money and productivity and maximizing measured outcomes like productivity. So people who are paid by the hour are led to think of the financial value of their time, spend more time working. They outsource less in my data because they want to maximize money as opposed to time. They are also more impatient. They enjoy leisure less. In one of my colleagues' studies, they enjoyed listening to music less when they were thinking about the economic value of their time, and they enjoyed chocolate less. They actually spent less time eating chocolate. So in one condition, they savored that dark chocolate that they really wanted in this lab study. And when people were thinking about the economic value of their time, they were like, I just need to get the study over with. My time is very valuable. So we do run the risk of thinking about the economic value of our time, of actually leading ourselves unintentionally to focus more on money and productivity and even less on activities in our lives that might make us feel time affluent and happy, like leisure activities or savoring the present moment. I'm not sure if you have either thoughts on this about billing, but basically, all of the academic literature suggests billing makes people more attuned to money and even less willing to take time off. But maybe your strong organizational norms counter against some of these negative effects of this financial salience of billing.
Yes, Ashley, we work on a billable model at Edelman, and everything you've described from your research rings true. So something that we're working towards as we implement TimeSmart at our organization and also work with our clients on it is setting a standard for our billing and sticking to that standard. So what I mean by that is we have something called a utilization standard, which is a percentage of time that we're supposed to be working and helping clients and being billable. What can happen though is instead of that being a standard to meet and then you have fulfilled your productivity requirement, it's almost like it becomes a race to see who can be more billable, who can be beyond that standard, who can be double that standard sometimes. So something that we're trying to do is normalize meeting your standard and seeing that as excellence. It is not the idea of going beyond it to seem more excellent, or to your point earlier about seeming busy as a status symbol. So being productive isn't just busy, it is substantial and it does make a difference. But the point is we need to be optimal about that. We need to optimize our productivity versus maximizing our productivity, which can be a trap in and of itself. So that's something that we're thinking about and working towards, is having those standards and sticking to those standards versus pressing ourselves to be beyond the standard to seem more excellent, because we can't be excellent at all if we're burnt out because we're not time smart.
Great. Thank you so much for that, Felicia. I want to move the conversation forward a little bit in my deck just to answer this next question. So the question in the chat is, what are some practical tips for us to prioritize tasks that are important to us? So really this finding time strategy will focus exactly on that. I think we've all been convinced at this point in the conversation that cultivating a time smart or time first and time smart mindset is something we should all aspire toward. But my data does bear out the fact that people who say that they're willing to prioritize time more than money, as opposed to people who prioritize money more than time, do report greater happiness, greater overall life satisfaction, and greater positive mood, regardless of their income or their demographic background. And in part of that is because they also spend time, as we've already been talking about so much in this conversation, in ways that promote happiness. So having this time first mindset, being willing to focus on time or other areas of your life, leisure, even over money, predicts even the willingness to have small interactions in a day with colleagues that you might not interact with very often. So in one study I ran, just the preference to prioritize time over money predicted whether students in a lab socialized with another peer that they had never met. The effects were stronger than extroversion, so it wasn't just about these students being more extroverted. And in fact, they spent about 18% more time socializing when they were in this time first mindset, when they were really focused on prioritizing time and leisure in the context of their everyday lives. And I see these effects all over the world. So when I've conducted globally representative studies, countries that have a higher proportion of respondents that value time over money report greater country level happiness, even controlling for GDP. Again, in part because people feel more empowered and able to spend time, or interested, like they have the time. They're not trying to be so overly, hyperly productive with all of their moments, that they have time to socialize, to exercise, and to engage in other activities that are important to them. So one tip for starting to prioritize tasks that are important to us is, one, figuring out what those tasks are, two, trying to cultivate a time first mindset, and three, it's really doing a time audit of our lives. If we were having a financial intelligence conversation, if we were trying to be better at budgeting, we would say, well, the first step is how are you spending your money? Looking at the money coming in and looking at the money coming out. Similarly, when it comes to time affluence and happiness, we need to ask ourselves, how are we spending time on an everyday basis? So researchers ask participants to engage in this exercise called the day reconstruction method. So asking people, what activities did you complete yesterday in the morning, in the afternoon, and in the but we really want to be maximizing the amount of time that we spend in meaningful and productive activities and minimizing the amount of time meaningless. Social media, maybe that's working on emails instead of working on important tasks. And again, we really want to eliminate that bottom left-hand quadrant. And we can do that by outsourcing. We can do that by delegating at work. We can do that by saying no, some of the strategies we've already talked about. But this initial mapping is a really important place to start to think about, how should we prioritize things in our lives? Well, we should be prioritizing things that are meaningful and productive, even sometimes if that means we're going to be in a bad.
So yeah, I think just on this point of prioritizing, we looked at 17,000 executive careers and people were successful and unsuccessful, and just the act of being able to prioritize well isn't a common skill. Less than 20% of executives are good at prioritizing. So if you apply that, to business problem solving, or you apply that to trying to have a more time smart life, it's a skill many of us need to further improve. To the question about prioritizing. So, and we found, like when we work with CEOs, sometimes they have, for example, like 30 priorities. Ask them, what are you working on in the business? What's important? Oh, it's 30 things, it's 40 things. But the very best ones narrow the list down, and the number's like 3. And I think Professor Willens would tell you that people who just try to do too many things, feel constantly time poor, versus folks who relentlessly prioritize. Your audio's back.
Yeah, we have a thunderstorm going through our neighborhood right now, which is cutting out my internet. So sorry about that. But I heard Jeff chiming in with some great solutions. So you can also just time block, as Felicia was mentioning, and put in time to work on important things. But in terms of what you should prioritize, I was agreeing with Jeff, so I overheard some of this conversation, that you want to be prioritizing the singular most important thing that you need to be working on at any one time. And sometimes I get questions around the temporal order. So should you work on a few smaller tasks first to get yourself warmed up? Should I put these time blocks for important stuff later in the day? The research says no. So my colleague has a great paper called Eat the Frog First. So you want to do the hardest, worst task first in the day while your brain is sharp, and then work on smaller tasks later on in the day. I'm not sure if either of you have any other strategies related to being prioritization and focusing on proactivity.
Yes, it's something we talk about, Ashley, with our clients from a values perspective. I agree with Jeff that it seems to be a challenge for executives, and no wonder that if leadership is having a challenge prioritizing, then the organization under their leadership might experience the same challenge. But ask our clients when we're working with them on something like this to go back to values and to go back to their strategy and what really matters, what is critically essential to that. Because often this issue of prioritization is because the list is too long and many of the things on the list are not going to have as big an impact as the key aspects that relate back to the value and the strategy. So it's really, like you said, Ashley, about doing that audit. And we think that being led by your values is a way of, or a lens to look through to do that audit, to determine what should be on the list and then how to prioritize it.
And I want to pick up in this conversation another question I'm seeing in the chat window. Alice, I will get to your comment in just a moment. I see it there. So this is the last comment at the bottom that says, what are some techniques, strategies, and changes we can make so that we're not working 7 days a week and 12 to 16-hour days on a regular basis? So I think we've talked a little bit about the importance of prioritization. I have also seen in organizations the importance of setting clear norms around communication. When are we expecting to be responsive? When are we not? Really doing and being disciplined about prioritization related to urgency and importance, but related to what the clients really need. So clients might ask you for 50 things, and you could say, I could do all of those 50 things, but then I won't be able to do these other 49. And I think the number one on that list is something you really care about. So I think it's about setting firm boundaries. So we've been working with a management consulting firm, one of the ones that is not time smart, like Jeff's consulting firm. And we've been setting clear norms of engagement, when you're going to get a break, when you're going to have time in the evening to cook dinner or be with your family. And we've been using data to hold teams accountable to adhering to those norms. And that can be an effective way of shortening the workday and really having these hard conversations about how do we be ruthless prioritizers, but not just talk about it, but the data holds these teams accountable. So they have to see that they are not meeting their goals. And these are KPIs that they set that are important for every individual and are talked about at a group level. So I will also talk through what funding time means briefly. This is another strategy of helping us become more time affluent. It simply means spending money to get rid of things that are in the bottom left-hand quadrant of your life, things that are unpleasant and that create stress. So you can spend as little as $40 on a time-saving purchase, according to my research, and that will pay off for happiness. So we randomly assigned working adults to spend $40 on a material purchase or to spend that same amount of money on a time-saving purchase. And on weeks where working adults spent $40 on a time-saving purchase, they felt happier and less stressed out. They also got greater satisfaction from spending that money on the weekend, in part because they were able to substitute that free time that they didn't have to do the chores with time that they were spending with friends and family. So this is an underutilized strategy. We've surveyed millionaires all over the world and found that even people who could clearly afford it had a lot of liquidity in their bank accounts. Only about 40% of them said that they spent money to outsource tasks they didn't like, even though, of course, spending more time in unpleasant activities has negative implications for happiness. So we should all think about not only areas where we can fund time, but also areas where we can delegate tasks to our colleagues at work.
You're just making me think, there are skills that go along with many of your principles, Ashley, as I read your research, and you point them out, you point many out, but to emphasize our experience, working with thousands of leaders and seeing what the successful ones do versus less successful ones. This point on delegating, being able to hire well and delegate effectively does wonders for bringing, more sort of time wealth into your life, where you don't have to sacrifice results or making an impact or doing great work. If you're great at hiring and willing to delegate, boom, now all of a sudden you just got, dozens of hours back in your week that you would have lost if you made hiring mistakes or if you were unwilling to, empower folks and let them run. So I think this hiring, prioritizing skill you've already mentioned, hiring skill, delegating skill. These are some of the in the workplace skills that if you build the skills you get better at, you will have more time and more control over your time.
And then this last strategy I want to talk about, there are going to be things in our life that we cannot get rid of. We're going to have to do them at work, even if we don't like them. We're going to want to do them at home because we want to be a positive role model to our kids. We might not be able to outsource everything. And so reframing the things we tell ourselves about how we think about our time also goes a long way for reducing time stress and promoting happiness. At work, simply remembering that even the worst budgeting task, worst data entry task is helping your colleagues get their work done can make you feel less stressed out about that task and imbue that task with more meaning. When it comes to our leisure, my colleagues have a great paper that just came out last year where, again, very simple design. I love these kinds of studies. Randomly assigned working adults to one of two conditions. One condition, treat your upcoming weekend like a regular weekend. The other condition, treat your weekend like a vacation. And what they found is that working adults who treated their upcoming weekend like a vacation reported greater happiness. They were more present in the moment. They were less distracted by all of the other things they could or should be doing. Now, you might just wonder, oh, well, these people probably just didn't do their chores for a weekend. No wonder they feel happy, or they spent more money at their favorite takeout restaurant. That is not what we see in the data. So people kind of went about their everyday life, but they're able to be more present in the moment and savor daily experiences more. And that is what was really driving the happiness effects here. So we see that even just rethinking our daily activities can go a long way. I want to also just end by saying that there are some individual time, end this formal presentation by saying that there's individual time use strategies in the remote environment that can be particularly helpful. So we want to be thinking about creating our own end of day or beginning of day transition. So breaks, boundaries, and transitions have gone missing in the virtual environment. So we recently worked with Microsoft to create virtual commutes. Now employees are not allowed to take meetings between 8 a.m. and 9 a.m. Instead, they're encouraged to take a virtual commute, a walk around the block, or to spend quality time with their friends and family instead. It's more important than ever to put proactive time in your calendar and focus on one daily must win a day. And finally, we want to create time affluence to-do lists. So that should say to-do lists. And why that matters is because we often find ourselves with small pockets of free time in the middle of the day, where maybe a meeting got canceled. Maybe a meeting didn't take as long as we thought it was going to. And usually most of us will fill that time with work. What I advocate for is put a to-do list on your computer that has non-work related stuff on it. Talk to your partner, check in with your kids, text your parent. And those kinds of reminders can go a long way, because in my data, major life decisions don't matter as much for happiness as the way we spend 15 minutes, 30 minutes. So I see in my data, your job, how much money you make, those things are important, but they fade into the background when it comes to happiness on a daily basis. But just changing the way that you spend 30 minutes or $30 can have profound effects on our mood, and especially over a repeated period of time. So those are my formal remarks. I want to make sure we hear from Jeff and Felicia if they have any more thoughts. And then there's a couple of additional questions that I'll try to get to as well.
I'll just say, Ashley, thank you so much for having me as part of this talk. For those who were asking earlier about things that junior team members can do to talk to their managers to negotiate being more time smart, I just want to say, I think a change is happening. We encourage our clients to bring consumer-grade thinking to the employee experience, meaning that companies are incented by revenues and profits to make it really simple for consumers to do things quickly, because they know from behavioral data and from survey data that if it's hard for a consumer to make a purchase, for example, they're going to go elsewhere when they encounter that friction. They're going to make that purchase elsewhere. Hence, one-click checkout at Amazon, for example. So we're encouraging our clients to bring that same sort of thinking to the employee experience, and the things that people have to do as a requirement for their job, but aren't the things they signed up to do or aren't the things that they're passionate about. We really just want to do what we're talented at and what we're best at and why we took the job. We know that we have those other administrative or other responsibilities, but they shouldn't be so burdensome and so full of friction that they actually reduce our time affluence and make work more laborious. So there has not been an incentive necessarily for businesses to focus on employees as much in that regard in the past as they've had an incentive to to focus on their customers. But I see that changing. I think COVID has changed a lot of things. And this forced work from home experiment has created the idea that flexibility should be something shared by a lot more people than it has been in the past. And I think the fact that that is becoming or has become a broad expectation is going to force companies to look at this more closely and to think about ways to give time back to employees. So for those of you thinking about in a more junior position, I don't have the power to make these changes. I think a change is coming, forced by societal changes and expectations. So just wanted to share that brief bit of insight that maybe can help you hold on to hope for the future.
My final words of wisdom are also thanks so much for this opportunity. I feel super passionate about life is short. We're all going to die. Their time is finite and should be the most valuable resource, but companies and society is not really set up that way. So I think fewer than 5% of companies are time smart. My best advice to job seekers are just really do your homework and try to select one of those top 5% firms. Or if you're an entrepreneur, really take pride in creating an environment in which people can do meaningful work and have control over their lives and over their time. And so, it's not even always a trade-off, because what Felicia was saying, there is a competition for top talent. So, the firms that offer the most time smart cultures should be able to attract the very best people who are then going to deliver the most value to the constituents they're serving. So thanks, Professor Willens and Felicia. It's wonderful to be on this panel. If you'd bring us home, Ashley, I will shut up now. Thank you.
Thank you both so much for all of your thoughts and insights. One person asked, Alice was asking me why I became interested in time, affluence, and happiness. And it really is because time is a fleeting resource and we all don't know how much time we have left. And I was reminded of that for personal reasons when two of my cousins passed away from muscular dystrophy before the age of 30. And that was just around the time I was starting my first job. And I wasn't doing a very good job of being time affluent or happy. And it really made me think that this was an important topic, not only now in our personal lives, but also in our professional lives. So as you're leaving this event today, I want you to put into the chat or write down somewhere one element you will commit to changing to have more and better time in the next 24 hours. This will work better if you share it with a friend so they can hold you accountable. And I've put some strategies you might want to consider in the bullets below. But I do want to thank everyone for their time and giving us the gift of your time and insightful questions. And for anyone who's interested in learning more about this topic, I have an HBR, also have a book related to time and happiness. And all of the insights and recommendations I have been providing today are based on a wealth of data that my collaborators and I have collected over the last several years. So I'll be sharing the slides and providing links to all of these research papers as well. So thank you again for your time, and I hope everyone has a great rest of the day.
Thank you, Ashley, and thank you also Felicia and Jeff. And thanks to all of you who have joined us today. We hope you'll join us soon for our next signature event. Information on upcoming events, as well as recordings of past ones, and soon this one, will be found at vpal.harvard.edu/vpal-events. Good night, everyone, and thank you for taking the time.